So good evening and welcome to today's discussion meeting on speeding up India's vaccine trial. And so before we move on, so this is organized by the Indian Scientists Response to COVID-19. So we are a platform of about more than 600 scientists from all over the country and also from outside. I'll request Professor Ramanujam, my colleague, to say a few words about ISRC, and then we will proceed with the discussions.
Thanks, Pinaki. I'll just I'll show you, I'll share my screen. And, so, yeah, this is the Indian Scientist Response to COVID-19. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all. The website is insightcove.in, where we have a lot of material for the public. We have information on busting hoaxes, question answers, in the Daily Life series, resources on mental health, hygiene, and for different sections of society. And I'd like to also point out that almost all the material that we have put out on these are available in 19 languages, as you can see, including Portuguese. And that's one of the important things that I want to mention. And then we have a whole lot of stuff on mathematical modeling the spread, the incisor model, and question answers related to that. We have a daily dashboard, which I can show you, where we have we track data and give graphs of various kinds that people can look at. And we also have a fair amount of our discussion summarized and apps and technology. So, and then there is a bunch of material for students and teachers for, for those interested from a pedagogic point of view, talking to students about virus evolution and so on. Okay, so this is to say that ISRC is a community of scientists who have come together at this point of time and responding to the crisis, and mainly in terms of science communication, providing authentic information. And we have a series of webinars where we have been interacting with many experts on many of these, and it is in this context that we have today's meeting as well. If in the site, you will see a whole lot of our events where I request you to take a look and make use of these resources and get in touch with us. And we are always looking for volunteers. Thank you very much. I'll hand it back to Pinaki. Stop sharing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jam. So today's discussion is, of course, about the vaccine trials and prompted by the recent discussions on the ICMR circular on a accelerated vaccine trial in India. So to discuss this very important matter that concerns all of us, we have two very eminent speakers, Professor Shahid Jamil, who is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Wellcome Trust DBT India Alliance, which has been a very prominent funding agency for the Indian biological community. It's a community working on biology and related topics. Professor Jamil is, of course, a very well-known virologist and an expert in the field. And we also have with us Dr. Ahmad Jasani, who is a medical practitioner himself, and also the editor of the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, which is a standard bearer for upholding the ethical standards in medical practice in India, and it has been a model in that aspect. So we will have a presentation of 20 minutes from both these speakers, and after that we can have in between the two speakers some technical questions, and after that we will open the floor for discussion, and then we will have a question answer session and so on. So I'll now request Dr. Jamil to start. So he will be talking about the design of vaccines and during this pandemic period, and how one can have an accelerated development, and also discuss in that context India's efforts.
Thank you very much. Let me start sharing my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I shall be talking about, in very general terms, keep it very simple, on developing COVID vaccines, especially in the time of a pandemic. Well, the first thing you do when you develop a vaccine is to obviously do research on it and then take it to preclinical development. And you have to really first decide what are the components of the virus that you are going to use to make the vaccine. Prior knowledge has told us that for coronaviruses, the spike protein, the little blobs that are shown in red, would make good candidates, as this is the first interaction of the virus with the cell. And in the cartoon below, you see how the spike protein binds to a receptor on cells, which is called the ACE2 receptor. And theoretically, if you have antibodies that are able to interfere in this binding, then you inhibit the infection of cells by the virus. And this approach has been used for many other viruses. The first recombinant vaccine for viral vaccine is the hepatitis B vaccine, which was based on exactly the same principle, and it's a very successful vaccine. So a lot of approaches that are being tried today for COVID vaccine are centered around the spike protein. Now, once you've selected a target, then of course you have to first do development in the lab and scale it up with partnership, in partnership with a company, and then do some preclinical development, which essentially means that you produce good lab good lab protocol or GLP material and good manufacturing practice material or GMP material, which you will test in an animal model if you have an animal model available, or if you don't have an animal model available, then you have no option but to go into humans directly. The animal model available for COVID is also not a very good animal model, but yet, but people have seen that normal mice don't get infected, but mice that are transgenic for the human ACE2 receptor can be infected. Ferrets and hamsters especially have been found to produce disease which looks similar to human disease. So hamsters are being used as models. And then of course the non-human primates, monkeys, have been used in early in the preclinical development for the vaccine. Once you have data from the preclinical studies, then essentially you submit it to the regulator, who will then give approval for human trials. So let me just first review the types of vaccines that are in development. So what I show you here is the full virus with the spike protein on it, and inside the virus you have the genetic material, which is RNA for the coronavirus. The first type of vaccine, and possibly the easiest vaccine to make, is a whole virus vaccine. And even among whole virus vaccines, the easiest to make is an inactivated vaccine, which essentially means that if this is a virus that grows very well in culture, then you can grow loads of that virus, purify it, inactivate it with a chemical, which is essentially formaldehyde, and you can use that as a vaccine candidate. There are other live virus there are other whole virus vaccines available as well. For example, the live attenuated vaccine, which means that it's a live virus, but it has been made much weaker than the normal virus. It is able to infect, but it is not able to produce disease. And if I give you the most famous example of these two types of vaccines, the oral polio vaccine is a live attenuated vaccine, and the inactivated polio or the injectable polio vaccine is the whole virus inactivated vaccine. And both are very successful vaccines and have been instrumental in ridding ourselves of polio. Now, one other fundamental difference between these two vaccines is that the live attenuated vaccine normally gives better immune responses because it is able to replicate to a small extent in the host and is therefore able to raise very good T cell immunity as well, which inactivated vaccines don't do very well. The other drawback with inactivated vaccines is that since they have been chemically inactivated, it is possible that the architecture of the proteins on the surface or even inside the virus could have changed, and therefore the antibodies or the T cell responses that you will get are not going to be as you would get in a live virus. But the advantage is that it's a very easy vaccine to make. These are the new generation vaccines. These are called genetic vaccines. And the idea is that you isolate the genetic material of the virus. And in this case, you isolate the gene for the spike protein, put it on a plasmid DNA, and inject the DNA directly. The idea is that this DNA would produce the spike protein RNA, and the RNA would be translated into protein, and all this happens inside the host. So therefore, the conformation of the protein is likely to be the right conformation. A new type of vaccine has been tried out with COVID, and that's RNA vaccine. So that's the next step from DNA. You produce the RNA for the spike protein in vitro, and you inject the RNA. The only trouble is that RNA is a labile molecule, and therefore it has to be protected. And this is the basis for a couple of vaccines, and they have different ways of protecting this RNA into small vesicles before these are injected. The next kind of vaccine is a viral vector vaccine, which essentially means that you deploy some other viruses to carry the gene for the spike protein. And these viruses would replicate to some extent in the host, produce the spike protein, and you would have an immune response against it. In the current scenario, there are a number of vaccines that are based on adenovirus platform. Adenovirus is a common cold virus. There's another vaccine which is based on a small virus called the adeno-associated virus. And there are a few other candidates based on vesicular stomatitis virus or measles virus. For all of these, the idea is that there would be limited replication of the viral vector, which essentially carries the gene into the host. And finally, you have the protein vaccines, either soluble proteins, which can be produced in a recombinant manner and then used as a vaccine, or virus-like particles if the protein is able to assemble by itself into a virus-like particle. There's nothing like it. And that is what happened to the hepatitis B vaccine. When you express the surface protein of that virus in the yeast cell, it naturally produces virus-like particles. VLPs are good because they are presented much better to the immune system compared to soluble proteins, and VLPs generally give a better response. So this is really these are the different types of vaccines that we are going to be talking about. Now, how is a new vaccine developed? approved and manufactured. Once you have finished preclinical testing, which means that you have tested it in a suitable animal model, the drug regulator gives you approval for different phases. Typically, you go into phase 1, which tests healthy volunteers, anywhere from 20 to 100 healthy volunteers. And the questions you ask in phase 1 is this vaccine safe? Does it seem to work? Are there any serious side effects? And how is the size of the dose related to the side effects? So as you see, phase 1 is essentially a safety trial in small numbers of volunteers. Once the vaccine has cleared phase 1, once you find that it is safe, then you go into phase 2, which essentially employs several hundred volunteers. And again, you address matters of safety in a larger population, in a more diverse population. So you would typically include both men and women. You would include people of different ages. You would also include in phase 2 people with comorbidities, because essentially you're going to take this vaccine into the population. And you will also ask whether people who are getting the vaccine are producing any immune response or not. What you also set in phase 2 is the frequency of vaccination and the dose which you will deploy in phase 3. So again, after you're done with phase 2, you produce all these results to the regulator, who will give approval for phase 3. And phase 3 typically employs hundreds to thousands of volunteers. And you essentially you randomize these volunteers. You give half of them the vaccine and half get placebo. And then at the end of the observation period, you ask whether the vaccine, again, you ask whether the vaccine is safe in a much larger population. Is the vaccine effective? And how do you test efficacy? You will see how many people who got the vaccine got the infection compared to those who did not get the vaccine. And that's how you will calculate the efficacy. After all this is done, the regulator, this is a slide from FDA. So FDA is the US regulator. But in India, the regulator is the Director General of Health Services, and specifically the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, or CDSCO. Once they have looked at all this data, then they will give you approval to license the vaccine or approve the vaccine. From a manufacturer's point of view, the vaccine is made in several batches. These are called lots. And each lot is tested to make sure that it is safe, it is pure, and it is potent. And the regulator is also supposed to inspect data from the manufacturer and also inspect the manufacturing facilities regularly to ensure that quality and safety is maintained. Now, what I told you is a traditional paradigm which takes months, sometimes years. In this outbreak, in this pandemic, faster protocols have been developed where things can go in parallel. So for example, some parts of preclinical development and clinical development can overlap. You don't have to end the animal studies to begin the human studies if the regulator is convinced with the early data you have. And you can also start preparing manufacturing and clinical trial and phase 3 sites much before you reach that stage. So as you see in the older paradigm, things are done serially, while in the new pandemic speed vaccine development, many things are done in parallel. And this is happening the world over. This is the current information relevant as of 2nd July. There are more than 125 vaccines for COVID that are in preclinical development. which means that these are vaccines that are not yet in human trials. They are either in development or they are being tested in animals. So they have not been cleared for clinical trials. There are 14 vaccines that are in phase 1, which means that these are being tested for safety and dosage. There are 11 in phase 2, which means that these are in expanded safety trials and expanded dose setting trials. There are 3 vaccines in phase 3, which means that they have gone into large scale efficacy testing. And 1 vaccine has received emergency approval from their regulator. So that's the current position. Now I will elaborate on this a little bit more, showing you the different types of vaccines and the developers and the phase of development. It's a busy slide, so I'll spend a little more time on it. So if you look at genetic vaccines, there are vaccines from the Military Medical Sciences Academy in China and from CureVac in Germany that are in phase 1. We also have a couple of vaccines for which phase 1 and phase 2 approval has been given. These include vaccines from, which is a partnership between BioNTech, Pfizer, and a Chinese company called Fosun Pharma. There's a Japanese company Angus. Their vaccine has received phase 1/2 approval. Inovio in US, a DNA vaccine. Imperial College has developed RNA vaccine, which has been given phase 1 and 2. And our own Zydus Cadila DNA vaccine, which was funded by DBT under the BIRAC program, has been very recently given approval for phase 1 and 2. Moderna was the first vaccine to get into humans, and Moderna has cleared phase 1 and they're now in phase 2. And this is also an RNA vaccine. If you look at viral vectors, there are multiple vaccines available based on viral vectors. Many of them are in preclinical development. The one that has advanced most is the Oxford University AstraZeneca vaccine, which is in phase 2, extended phase 2 and phase 3 trials. There is a Russian vaccine, which is in phase 1. And a vaccine from a Canadian-Chinese partnership called CanSino Bio has been given emergency approval in China for use only in the Chinese military. And this vaccine has not gone into phase 3. After phase 2, it has been given emergency approval by the Chinese regulator to go straight into the army people. The protein-based vaccines, Novavax, which is a US-based company, has its vaccine in phase 1 and 2. Clover GSK Dynavax, the Chinese Academy of Medical Sciences, and a company from Australia, they have protein vaccines which are in phase 1. And another Chinese protein vaccine, that's a whole virus vaccine. So these are protein-based vaccines. The whole virus vaccines, there are a couple of them. 2 Chinese vaccines, actually 3 Chinese vaccines, and 1 Indian vaccine, the ICMR Bharat Biotech vaccine, which is in phase 1 and 2. The Sinopharm vaccine in China is in phase 3. So that gives you the most current landscape of vaccines that have moved forward into clinical development. So I will simply end by putting out some key questions that need to be addressed when people are developing vaccines. Do people develop immunity when they are given a candidate vaccine? That is very important because unless they develop the right kind of immunity, the vaccine is not going to be working. If people develop immunity, how long does it last? Does it last a year? Does it last 5 years? Does it last a lifetime? Does it last only a few months? And there is no way to predict this. uh, we are seeing quite varied response in people who get COVID. So for example, people who get very mild infection show very low levels of antibodies, and their antibodies wane off pretty quickly compared to those who get severe infection, whose antibodies last longer. But then we must remember that this outbreak, this pandemic is only 6 months old. So the data that we have is only for a few months. So how long will immunity last is important. Influenza virus, you know that one has to get vaccinated every year because there's a new strain of virus that circulates every year. On the other hand, if you get the hepatitis B vaccine, you need to get a booster only every 5 years. Once you get hepatitis A, you are protected for life. So it's very difficult to predict what virus will give what kind of immunity. The third question is, what kind of immune response should developers look for? Most developers of the COVID vaccine are looking for antibody responses. Antibodies are likely to protect in this case based on experience from the SARS-1 as well as from the endemic coronaviruses. What role, if any, T-cell immunity plays, especially in prolonged immunity, remains to be studied, remains to be seen. How do we know that a vaccine is likely to work? What is your endpoint? Are you looking for sterilizing immunity, which means that you're looking for a vaccine that will also prevent infection, or are you looking for anti-disease vaccines? Most vaccines, by the way, do not prevent infection. They only prevent disease. So it would be unrealistic to look for sterilizing immunity for this vaccine as well. And most importantly, will it be safe? The vaccine that you're developing, will it be safe? There have been examples of, for example, inactivated vaccines that have given rise to vaccine-associated adverse effects. It happened in the late 1960s with the respiratory syncytial virus vaccine, which essentially stopped its development. It has also happened to dengue vaccine, where it had to be withdrawn from Philippines just a few years ago when it was found that people who got the vaccine were actually getting more sick than people who had no exposure to a vaccine. So these are issues that need to be looked at carefully. I will stop here and maybe answer questions if there are any.
Yeah, we'll just take a couple of technical questions. So one question that came up was, so are there differences in safety profiles between different types of vaccines, live versus attenuated? And in the same context, what is the process of attenuation typically? If you can just say a few words.
Yeah, so obviously a live vaccine, you always have to worry about vaccine escape mutants. You have to worry about a mutant that regains its ability to cause disease. And this happens, for example, for oral polio. 1 out of 1 million people who get vaccinated with oral polio develop the disease. So you have to balance benefit against risk. But a live attenuated vaccine gives you the best immunity, and it gives you the most long-lasting immunity. As far as inactivated vaccines are concerned, inactivated vaccines are safer than live vaccines, but then the trade-off is that they don't give as good immunity as you will get with a live attenuated vaccine. And of course, every lot has to be tested for proper inactivation. You don't want a situation where any virus is left inactivated. So the safety profiles have to be constantly checked, and the safety profiles are, of course, different. I mean, the most safe vaccines are the subunit vaccines because all you're doing is giving a single protein. I hope I answered the question. That was asked.
Thank you, Professor Jamil. More questions later on. So I'll now request Dr. Jasani to start his presentation. Dr. Jamil, if you can stop sharing screen. Yes, thank you. Yeah, Dr. Jasani, you can start. Dr. Jasani, we can't hear you.
Yeah, that is what I was looking for. Right. Can you see the screen now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can see the screen.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at technology, so sometimes it happens. Good evening to everybody, and I'm very, very happy to be here. And I was very, the Professor Jamil's presentation has really enlightened me quite a lot, because that is going to be very, very useful in what I'm going to say here. Let me start with two quick comments and then go to my presentation. One is that because there is a pandemic and because there are a large number of people getting infected and number of people are dying in different countries, there is a lot of panicky reaction to the situation. And in this situation, there are always possibilities of some vaccines which would not have otherwise be tested so quickly, getting into the research system. And that's where perhaps after I finish, we can have more discussion, particularly the vaccines like mRNA, RNA vaccine, which I find requires much more work than the other vaccine. The second is that we must keep it in mind that all things that we do in vaccine research is on the healthy subjects. So the first question we'll need to ask is that what should be the limits of safety? I mean, we have been debating in environmental movement, we are debating other ways, that what is the minimum, requirement of pollution, what is the minimum requirement of exposure to various things. Same way here. When you are testing something on healthy human being, or after you discover the vaccine, you are vaccinating mass of people, what should be the safety profile? What is the minimum standard that is required? And I think that's where there is going to be a lot of debate. I'm not going to go into the well-known aspects of the principles and all, but I'm just going to take a 5 major dimension. I think the most important dimension in vaccine research is community, because vaccine is for the mass of people. It is part of the public health intervention to prevent a disease. And in the community, there are many areas. As I said, that community is normally going to be very sensitive to this aspect, because healthy volunteers are used throughout research, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. This is very different from doing research for therapeutic drugs. In therapeutic drugs, you are dealing with patients, and that is where the risk-benefit analysis become very different, because the disease itself causes a lot of harm to the person or even death as compared to the drugs that they are using. So the comparators are very different as compared to the vaccine research, where healthy volunteers are used throughout. And more importantly, in the phase 1, which is first in human use of a new vaccine, it becomes extremely important, because you are not able to anticipate what would be the risk that will come to the participant. there is a relatively high incidence and prevalence of infection, because most of the time you go for the endemic diseases. And now we are talking about pandemic, where there is a lot, pressure. And when there is a pressure, there is a lot of vulnerability, because people are desperate. Governments are desperate. They will tell you that, well, economy is getting shut down. We need to have vaccine as early as possible. And that itself, that desperation itself is creates a lot of pressure on the community. There are spokespersons in the community who may say that we are ready to sacrifice anything, but they themselves may not sacrifice. They may make others to sacrifice. So that becomes very, very important, that what kind of people will be participating. Vulnerable people who come under pressure, who are coming under the influence, or who are under the influence of ideology, who are being pushed, or even asking for the armed forces to participate, because that is where the commander can say that, well, all of you are going to get it, and nobody can say no. Earlier, phase 1 trial was always done on prisoners, once upon a time, and all those things stopped simply because of the problem, ethical problems with that. There's a possibility of stigmatization, cultural and moral issues related to the kind of disease that you are dealing with. So there are a lot of apprehensions of the public. When you get a vaccine, do you also get a disease, or do you get some other problem? Why? Those things are there. Involvement and financial commitment of the state. There will be a lot of debate about how much government, because it's a captive market. Once you discover it, the company who discovers becomes billionaire, simply because there is a captive market. States are going to buy, and everybody is going to get it. So there is a need for creating a political consensus, not based on panicky reaction, but I think through a very informed discussion with the community. That is very, very important part. The third is in the community participation is transparency and consent. At the trial site, we must involve representatives of the community of different kind of strata, from whom the participants may be drawn. The community advisory board can help you quite a lot. The broader involvement in developing informed consent form. I have not seen still the informed consent form of any of the COVID trials, and I'm quite surprised. We used to have a huge debate and discussion when we were developing, say, informed consent form for HIV/AIDS trial in India, vaccine trial, the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative. Massive broad level consultation in order to ensure that people are given full information, and the process of informed consent will not be vitiated in any way. Also, recruitment criteria. If you say that we should not be using, the vulnerable people, then recruitment must emphasize on the people who will be able to take, informed decision. So, and people who will not, whose voluntariness is not violated. That means more open recruitment, public advertisement, care taken to avoid coercion, inducement, gender imbalance. And in the early phase 1 and phase 2 trial, as I said, that vulnerable participants are to be avoided unless absolutely necessary, because that's where the initial risks are involved. As Dr. Shahid was saying, that as we speed up the trial, we do many things parallel. If ICMR and the companies are planning to do trial, I think when they are in the laboratory, they should try to identify the institutions where the trials will be carried out. They should start working on those institutions and equipping them so that they are well equipped to do the phase 1 clinical trial. They should be well equipped. There should be, highly trained and experienced researchers there, and working in the community there, so that from where participants are going to come, creating a lot of engagement with them. This should be happening parallel when they were in the laboratory. Our problem is that after we get DCGI clearance, we then talk about which institutions and what is happening there. So that should not be there. I think it should be done parallelly if you want to really speed up the clinical trial. The second important ethical consideration is that what kind of standard of care you are going to take when you are doing the vaccine trial. Let us look at the stakeholders. There are trial participants. They expect that they'll have maximum protection, that the researchers are good people, sponsoring them are good people, and they will take good care of us. That is the expectations of the participants. They say, believe that, there has to be a relationship of trust, where they believe that, yes, they are not going to, expose me to undue harm. And they want to be protected. They want the minimum harm to happen. Research sponsors, their primary interest is in diligently doing the research. Research institutions are primary interest in getting robust finding. Health services, they have limited resources. Again, in order to really provide benefits and take care of any kind of harm, they should be well equipped. In this context, the standard of care is it has to do a lot of reconciliation between the various stakeholders, and I think it takes time. So it has to be a parallel process of doing it. The next is who should benefit in the standard of care. Trial participants who acquire infection and disease targeted by the vaccine. You are doing vaccine for the COVID, and the person gets infection of COVID. Should that person get full treatment free of charge for that? Trial participants who have severe condition detected during the trial period. When a person is on the trial, at that time, some serious conditions are detected. Will that person get full medical care free of charge from the researchers or the health services? Individuals considered for enrollment but excluded as a result of the pre-enrollment screening. When you do screening, you find that some people are not real, who look healthy, but they may not be healthy. They may have problems. Will they be provided care? The other persons linked to the trial participants, but not considered for enrollment, family members, sexual partners, and all, depending upon what kind of disease you are researching. So, and the community at large, or the nation at large, which is hosting the trial. All of these benefits needs to be worked out. Just as we do a lot of technical part of science, we should also do this part of a clinical trial, so that the benefits are due to everybody and they are delivered. What type of care and disease condition that will be taken care of? Only disease that is for which the vaccine is being studied, or other diseases too, if they are there among the participants. So this is a very important area, and it is called ancillary care. And ancillary care, must be put in place in a proper manner. What level of care and who will pay for it? I think this needs to be worked out. It's not just about expenses of the trial, but also expenses of the broader benefit, as I was talking about. If something is detected, where the referral will take place? Will research institute itself provide care, or it will be done by the public health system? If it is so, is the public health system equipped to do it? Care may involve additional measures, including setting up of additional services in that area. And who pays? Government, sponsor. Sponsor is important because sponsor may have a patent and may make money afterwards. So should the sponsor be made to invest on this? Oh, sorry. Third is injury compensation. If there is something goes wrong and a person gets injured, what do you do? Trial insurance policy, how to operationalize them, that is very important, because many people don't know how to, if there is something there, and then it goes into litigation, and for 20, 30 years, you don't get anything. You have to build on past experiences, that how compensation system has worked. And in HIV/AIDS trial, I remember that we had proposed, and there was a setting up of what is called complaint and arbitration board for adjudicating claims. Retired judges or senior lawyers were appointed at each trial site, so that if there is anything where the payments are to be made for injuries, it is done very, very fast and it doesn't get prolonged. And in this kind of pandemic situation, I think it is very important, because pandemic is accompanied by a lot of impoverisation of the people. People are not able to have a really good way of earning money. Providing long-term health insurance is also another way of doing that. Fourth is transparency. The altruism of public should be made by the transparency of the clinical trial, making clinical trial protocol available in public domain, making templates for informed consent form available in public domain, publicly available information on benefits for the participants, community, and others, and about the injury death compensation, availability of anonymized trial data in public for others to reanalyze. So transparency, because it is for the public cause, is very, very important. The fifth one is post-trial benefit, which is the last major point, and then I go into what happened recently. Vaccine produced in the pandemic with the participation of altruistic public and the state financial support must be treated as public good. I think that's the minimum that we must try to emphasize. The vaccine through private effort must be free from profiteering. Affordability for the state and the people must be the prime consideration. Such universal access to the successful vaccine must be a part of the agreement from the outset. I think that is a very, very important area that you work out MOUs from the very beginning with the researchers and the sponsors and the institution. Now let me come to the last three small slides. Just a quick comment about the recent controversy about BBL. I think I wrote wrong spelling. Bharat Biotech Limited and ICMR vaccine trial, phase 1 and phase 2, right? If you see the approval that is given by the CDSCO, their committee, SEC, on 25th of June provided approval. And it has said few things which are very important there. They say that after detailed deliberation, the committee recommended for grant of permission to conduct the phase 1 and 2 clinical trial, subject to the following conditions. First, that PCR test should be used, which is, I think, quite understandable. I don't know why they have mentioned it. Did they miss out in the protocol? I know, I just said. But the second one is very, very important. Clinical trial sites should have facilities to handle emergency situations such as anaphylaxis. It's not just anaphylaxis. It should have 24-hour intensivist facilities available. I also, and when I have sat on the ethics committees, I have insisted that the intensivists, the cardiologists, the anesthetists, and other intensivists available in the institution should be co-investigator for that site, so that they also have a kind of ownership and they also become responsible to provide this support. When you do phase 1 clinical trial, it is extremely important. And I think there should be information available about each facility, particularly in this, because there are 12 institutions. Half of them are from the private sector. They are doing some clinical trial, but we do not know how well equipped they are. The investigator should have appropriate qualification and experience, which is also very important. I'm surprised that institutional facilities and the qualification of researchers in each institution was not part of the protocol that CDSCO examined. And the firm should submit results of phase 1 clinical trial to DCGI before initiating phase 2 study. This raises a question that if DCGI is going to look at this data and the SEC, the committee, is going to examine it before they allow the phase 2 to happen, then why did they give permission for the both phase together? They should have actually done one and then asked them to come back with all the data and then they given for the phase 2. Accordingly, the firm should submit revised protocol to DCGI for approval. Till 2nd July, all SEC minutes I have gone through, but there hasn't been any discussion on the revised protocol. And the Cadila has come out with another vaccine trial where there is a DCGI has made a very clear demand that the phase 1 and phase 2 trial should have a different participants. I don't know why it has not happened here. Perhaps it is already there in the protocol, and so it is covered. This is a DCGI approval, the 0.3, and they have added this one. And they have again repeated the same thing the clinical trial participant site should have facilitated. Now, this is on 29 June, after 4 days. I should have expected DCGI to give permission after the revised protocol comes, where the facility information is provided, the qualification and experience information is provided, and all those things. And so that they can say that, yes, we are very, very confident that you have right kind of situation to do it. But here also, there is an approval letter with the same conditionalities there. There are additional things are there that they want more animal toxicity data. So we don't know the animal toxicity data that were provided earlier. Were those toxicity data were inadequate? If they were inadequate, in which sense? I think some communication is necessary. If not with, so that people come to know that the DCGI had done a full job. Certificate of analysis of drug product, the stability of the vaccine they are going to use, and the batches that what Dr. Jamil was talking about, right? And with NIV MOU, the MOU with even institutions, all those things are very, very, the contract entered by the sponsor with the investigator and institution, even they are not provided so far. I think that they should have done long back if they wanted to work parallelly and speed up the clinical trial. And also the Kasoli, examination of the basis of the of this. Okay, this is the last slide, and then this is about the ethics committee. You will find that there are private institutions which have already approved, and they have done at a lightning speed as compared to the ethics committees in the other bigger institutions which are involved. And so I think it's very important to understand that ethics committee really took into consideration all the issues that we have been discussing earlier in the earlier slide about the vaccine design. So this is it. Thank you very much. I'll look for the questions from you.
Thank you, Dr. Jasani, for a very clear exposition about the ethical standards that need to be followed. So one question that had come up earlier was about the publication of preclinical trials, about the results from there. So can you say something about this, whether India requires, or the Indian standards require, that the preclinical trials need to be published, or what should be available in the public domain?
Well, as far as law is concerned, I don't think it is written in Drugs and Cosmetic Act and the new clinical trial rules of India that they must have a publication there. But it is always, as I was saying, that at every stage there should be transparency. There should be sharing of the data with the scientific community, so that people know what is happening, and the claims made at different stages about the beneficial aspects of the product that is being tested is verified continuously by different scientists. So it is ideal. Ethically, I would demand it, but legally, so far as I know, in our law has not made it mandatory. They could even do simple publication on their website or on preprint journals, and ICMR is its own journal, where they can quickly publish those data and share with everybody. I think if they do it, it will be great. Otherwise, we'll keep demanding, and hopefully someday we'll get them.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we just open the floor for discussion. So before we do that, I'll just request Professor Jamil to just talk about how fast can we expect. I mean, if you do these processes in parallel, so what is the quickest time scale over which one can see a successful trial, happening for the vaccine?
Certainly not by August 15th. See, there are processes that you can do in parallel, but there are others you can't do in parallel. You can't do a phase 2 and phase 1 in parallel. They have to be done serially because in phase 1, you test on small numbers to ensure the safety of the vaccine. Before you go into to test safety in a more diverse population, which has people of different ages, people with comorbidities, you cannot, test in phase 1 an unknown vaccine on people with comorbidities. So these two cannot be done in parallel. So it's hard to put weeks or months on it. And the trouble is, I mean, a lot of journalists call me and ask me the same question, that how long will it take? And my answer is, I don't know. They don't have to convince me, they have to convince the regulator. And there has to be, every trial has an endpoint. So what is the endpoint? What is the endpoint that the regulator approved? That is important. Also, when you go to phase 3 will depend upon where you are testing it. If you are testing your vaccine today in Delhi, Mumbai, Ahmedabad, and Chennai, it will take less time for people to get naturally infected compared to if you were doing it in Arunachal Pradesh or in Kerala. So it depends, there are a lot of variables here. So I think it's not possible to put a definite number on it, and we should not insist on putting a number on it. That's the whole point of this.
May I add one point?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
please carry on.
I completely agree with him that it is not possible. But at the same time, whenever I got this question and when I was reading Dr. Bhargava's letter, I kept getting an impression that completing clinical trial is being equated with a successful clinical trial. These two things are very, very different. You may have completed clinical trial in certain time frame, but there is no guarantee that you have a vaccine which is working. You see, and that is the major problem in science. We are not magicians; we are scientists, and as a scientist, we do everything, and if we fail, we again try to do with another molecule, and that's how there are large number of molecule at the preclinical phase, so that if one fails, another comes in the picture, and we keep trying till we get the right kind of vaccine that is required. So it's I think they should separate out. Don't talk about launching at all. The term launching is bad. Say that when will you complete the trial? I think there can be some time, timeline that could be given about it. That yes, we'll try to do faster and do it in, say, instead of 2 years, we'll do it in 1 year or in 9 months. That one can talk about. But launching is possible only after you have a successful clinical trial.
And may I also add that till you have a successful clinical trial, it doesn't become a vaccine. It remains a vaccine candidate.
As per Indian law,
so thanks to both
3
of you
years,
for
the new vaccine remains new vaccine. You see.
Yeah, thanks to both of you for clearly clarifying this point, because this is a very common perception and common question that comes from the general public who are not very well versed about the details about this process and so on. So one question that came up was about the data management and data analysis. So during the trial process, who is responsible? Is it the sponsor, the researcher, or from the participating sites? So who has the control over the data that is being generated during the trial process?
Dr. Jasani, you would like to answer that?
Dr. Jasani, do you want to take?
Well, I've never done a clinical trial. I've sat on the ethics committees of the clinical trial. But on a continuous basis, the data go to the data safety monitoring board, because they have to look at what kind of adverse events are being reported, analyze them. They also have to look at whether the information that is coming may be reading to the endpoint earlier or late. So, they may have to do interim analysis of that. So that is and the researcher. In all of them, there is a lot of involvement of the sponsor. If the question is intended to bring out the point that there is a conflict of interest, in the sense that those who are going to produce and market it are only doing the research, and so they have a lot of interest in the success of making the clinical trial successful in whatever means possible, and there may be there may be possibilities of cutting corners, then yes, there is definitely a conflict of interest there, and there should be different firewalls which would reduce that conflict of interest.
Okay, so one question. So this is about human challenge studies. So might human challenge studies be considered for COVID-19 vaccine? Do you think human challenge studies would help complete the trials at a faster pace? How accepting it would be the possible in India and so on?
Well,
so
let's
Dr. Jamil,
understand what a human challenge study is. A human challenge study is injecting live virus into a person who has received the vaccine and to see if that person is protected. Now, human challenge studies have been done in the past, but they have all been done in cases where there is a good treatment available for the disease. Here we don't have any treatment. So besides the whole lot of ethical issues that are raised by human challenge studies, unless you have a sure shot treatment. So there are two requirements. One, if you don't have a good animal model, and second is, do you have good treatment? And I'll give you the example of malaria. There are no good animal models for testing malaria vaccines. But there's very good treatment for malaria. So human challenge studies have been done for malaria vaccines. But in this case, I think it's premature, it will be too dangerous to fast track a vaccine by doing human challenge studies. Especially since you have a transgenic mouse model that's available to you, you have a hamster model that is available to you, those should be deployed. And non-human primates. Monkeys have been used in preclinical studies. All that is available.
Thank you, Dr. Jamil. I just add one point. We had a webinar on this human challenge studies in Suno, India. So if people are interested, they can go to that. But there has been a lot of preparation for the human challenge studies have been done. Even WHO has come out with the criteria for doing the human challenge study. But as Dr. Jamil said, and I'm very happy that scientists are saying this. The problem at the moment, if you read the literature, you will find that politicians and bioethicists of all of them, large number of ethicists have come out saying that let us do human challenge study just now, because there is a big threat to the humanity and we should go ahead with them. And here are the scientists who are saying that, well, be careful because we don't have a treatment. And this is not the virus which goes away. It's not self-limiting virus which goes away without sequelae. It can cause some problem for which you have absolutely no answer at the moment. And we also don't know as much about the pathophysiology of this virus. So all those things combined, I don't think there is a possibility of doing it. But I hope, there are always rogue scientists and rogue governments which, who would like to do it in the name of, spinning up a candidate vaccine. And I prefer them to be more balanced and go by the very classical, well-defined route as Dr. Jamil was explaining to us.
Thank you. So one more question. So what does fast tracking actually mean in terms of if one contextualizes in the within the URI guidelines. So what does this fast tracking of the trials actually mean?
So fast tracking would mean that you prepare sites before the vaccine comes to that stage. You prepare manufacturing facilities before you come to that stage. Give you an example. Serum Institute has invested crores of rupees into setting up a manufacturing facility for the Oxford vaccine before the Oxford vaccine has been proven to be successful. And of course, they have been helped in this by various donor agencies. But that is what is meant by fast tracking. You don't wait till a vaccine is proven to be successful before you develop facilities to manufacture large amounts of it. That's one example. In the and you know the other was in the pandemic development of vaccines. Some part of preclinical animal trials could overlap with the clinical trials, and that some people are doing. But there is only so much you can fast track. US government, for example, has declared something called warp speed development. They are saying, before I even see data that this vaccine has potential, I'm going to put my money on it. They are doing it. They are making intelligent guesses to fund some vaccines into fast track development. So all these are examples of really fast tracking.
I think we need to have some way of talking about fast tracking, which is ethically justified and ethically not justified. I will get really worried that if there is too much of money put on something, it creates so much of pressure on the researchers, the institutions, and others involved. Even so much of pressure on the regulator. We know that we don't live in a perfect society. We can talk about what is the ideal way of doing, but when huge amount of money is riding on something, people do things which are not desirable, and that's how I think they should slow down here on this. I don't mind they're preparing sites much more in advance, like they want to do clinical research, because they require more equipment. I remember in when AIDS and HIV/AIDS vaccine trial was to be done at NARI in Pune, the National Institute of for AIDS. They really invested there to improve it, so that when the trial started, they had everything, all the equipment as well as trained human power available. All those things are, up to a certain extent fine, but I think there should be certain limit and certain way of doing it. Otherwise, I'm worried that the integrity of the research may get affected, where people may get tempted to do things which otherwise they would not do. Money is a very, very big big corrupting force in everywhere in the society, and I would not like it to become a pressure on the scientists when they are doing science.
Okay, thank you. So one more question for you, actually. This is regarding the formation of the IRBs. So very few IRBs assess investigator suitability and trial site facilities. At best, they require PI, CV, but not for the whole team, and the facility assessment is very limited. So can you kindly share your experience of IRBs in India? How do they work?
You want to? I'm sorry, I didn't get your question. It's about IRB, right? Institutional Review Board, right? Ethics Committee.
Yeah.
Well,
yes.
Fortunately, because of a lot of controversies in the clinical trial in India, which started with the HPV vaccine demonstration project, and subsequently, we have now ethics committees which are registered with the CDSCO. So if you are doing any drug research, vaccine and new drug or whatever, and if you are reviewing it, you have to have a registration there. That gives a lot of power to the regulator to see that the ethics committee function well. Unfortunately, the regulator is not able to send the inspectors and see that they function in the way it is required. So that is one major problem. Another problem is how well they are trained, because whatever training criteria that is there for giving them ethics committee registration, they should be made optimal. And that's how, when you select the institution for phase 1 clinical trial, you should have a very robust ethics committee. You should have some very strong bioethicists involved in it. I'm quite surprised about ICMR Bharat Biotech trial, because I remember in April 2020, ICMR had appointed a COVID ethics committee at national level with Dr. Vasanta Muthuswamy as the chair of it. He was the deputy director general of the ICMR. Long back she retired. I don't know whether this, or there is a central ethics committee, which I was a member a few years back, but I don't know whether it exists today. It should be there. They should have first reviewed this protocol, and then it should have gone to the local ethics committee. And that might have provided you an extra layer of safety, because a national level ethics committee with the national level expert also going through it might have picked up if there was any problem much earlier. And then the local level ethics committee, even if they are small institution, they could have added additional safeguards which were required in the clinical trial. But I don't know whether that kind of central ethics review of these protocols have been carried out. And nationally important issues, I think that should be done. Perhaps it is not done in this case. I have no idea.
Okay, thank you for explaining this. Question for Dr. Jamil. So, do you expect genetic vaccines to work out quicker, as has been suggested? And also, are there nano vaccines in being worked out? And so
So, I don't know what is meant by nano vaccines. If it means encapsulating these in nanoparticles, I really don't know what is meant by that. Hard to predict whether genetic vaccines will be successful. There are no examples so far of genetic vaccines being in clinical practice. So these are very new ideas, especially the mRNA vaccine. There is not even a single mRNA vaccine that has been approved so far. So it's hard to say. I think there are many new concepts that are getting developed with COVID. Let us not rush into it and kill those concepts before we realize the full potential of those approaches. Research will continue to be done for much longer on these things. And if I may add, what India really needs to focus on at a research level is to have various platforms available. Do we have a mRNA platform? Do we have a DNA platform? Do we have a replicating vector platform? Why do these other people, how have they moved so quickly into development? Because they have platforms available. Moderna was working on an mRNA vaccine for Zika, for other things, and they quickly engineered to move into this. Something that we lack in the country is the availability of platforms, and we must pay some serious attention to this. This is definitely not the last pandemic that has come. There'll be more. So we should be prepared.
thank you for making this very important point about this preparation and so on. One question for Dr. Jasani. So
Yeah.
you mentioned this at the end of your presentation about the economics of the vaccines and so on, and the easy availability to the common people and so on. So one thing that I recently heard on some interview was about the World Economic Forum actually buying stocks, future stocks of vaccines to see how it will be distributed and pricing set and so on. So can you say something about how this process happens? We can't hear you, Dr. Jasani.
Hello, I just couldn't hear because there was a lot of disturbance when you were talking.
No, I was asking about the pricing of the.
Okay, yeah.
So how does it work out? What is the economics and so on? So if you mentioned it at the end of your presentation.
Well, there is one thing is when state is involving investing so much of money through its own institutions, there has to be a vaccine being made available as a public good to everybody. Now, how state works out the economics of it, that could be an issue which one can examine. But as it is happening today in the epidemic, which when I see in Mumbai and Delhi, where people are, according to your capacity to pay, you are treated differently when you have COVID. When you get bad if you have a lot of money, to go to the big 5-star hospital. If you don't have money, you go from one hospital to another and you are dead, at the end. Or you are so late that you suffer and perhaps you survive, but with a lot of sequelae. I think we need to get out of it. We must have a health system which is universal access, which also includes public health intervention, that includes the vaccines, which are necessary. And that's where the state needs to be very, very strong. I mean, your and my personal liberty is taken away today, okay, under the emergency. But personal liberty of doing business of the business people is not taken away. Why can't the business be reoriented because of the emergency, at least in healthcare, to the needs of the people, where the state becomes a main arbiter of how the health services will be distributed? In a country where 75% of the health services is controlled by private sector, there is a lot of miseries that I see around, and I think that needs to be avoided when the vaccine comes out, when everybody, is clamoring for vaccine and few people just getting it easily within the country. And when our own country has discovered that vaccine, and still we have the same kind of, hierarchical way of who gets and who doesn't get. I think we have to address inequities in a very big way, because this pandemic has made it stark for all of us. And it should shake up any good person in the world when they see those pictures of people suffering. I think that's where I would say there should be something about the pricing which does not allow the huge profiteering to the private sector or the corporates who are involved in this.
So Inaki, I might say something about the vaccine capacity in the country and globally. It is estimated that the total global capacity for vaccine manufacturing is about 8 billion doses a year. But remember, the world is not just making COVID vaccines. The world is making other vaccines too that are used for childhood immunization. India's capacity is estimated to be roughly 3 billion doses a year, out of which about 1.2 billion doses rests with Serum Institute and the rest is distributed to others. I am told that out of the 3 billion doses that are likely to be produced in India, 1 billion doses is secured for domestic purpose, while 2 billion doses can be exported out. That is supposedly the arrangement at this time. I cannot verify this. I've been given this information by somebody very trustworthy. So I'm just giving it out. The other is this organization called CEPI, which is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Through Innovations. which is a collection of funders that are funding vaccine development. And CEPI has funded manufacturing capacity for 4 billion doses of the coronavirus vaccines at facilities across the world, including in India. So those are the kinds of numbers we are talking about. And of course, once vaccine comes out, it will have to be prioritized. People who are at the front line, who are the most at risk, for example, healthcare workers, are likely to get it first. So,
well, India is considered pharmacy of the world. And when I see Indian people, I find that they struggle to get the basic medicine. I just can't understand this disparity.
Sir,
And,
India may be the pharmacy of the world, but India still imports active pharma ingredients up to 70 to 80% from China.
yeah,
Even
and
the paracetamol, even the paracetamol we make, we get the APIs from China. And so that's another thing that we need to be worried about.
yeah.
And we need to, really build up capacity considering the recent episodes that have happened.
And if we have a capacity to produce 3 billion doses, will we get only the third one? The first two will go to the other people, as it was happening with PPE and when hydroxychloroquine was talked about, So that is another way, that how far government will give priority to Indian people as compared to, giving it to the people who are very powerful outside.
Those of us who are above 60 can hope to get it better, earlier than
I'm above 60.
Earlier than the 20-year-olds.
And hope it will be very safe vaccine.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, I think we are running out of time, so we have to end this very fascinating of this vaccine trial process, its ethical aspects, and also, of course, now we discuss the economy of it. So thank you, Dr. Jamil and Dr. Jasani, for this very interesting and explaining to us in very great detail. And I hope all of us have learned something from this discussion. So thank you very much for participating into this.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to all of you for joining us.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.